She dialed the wrong number, and the man who entered her life wasn't her savior. He was the most notorious mafia boss in the American Midwest. She was held captive in a luxurious penthouse by the man she once loved, a man willing to kill her to silence her. And the only one who answered her text messages was the man the entire city of Chicago feared. This is the story of a wrong number text message that changed everything. Like and comment the city you're viewing so I know how far my story has come. Don't miss a second. The rain came sideways that night. It hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 53rd floor like something angry, like something that had been building for a long time and finally stopped pretending otherwise. Chicago stretched out below in smears of orange and white, all those streets and intersections and people who had no idea what was happening up here, in this apartment that looked like a magazine spread and felt like a coffin. Rowan Vale stood at the bathroom mirror with both hands gripping the marble sink and told herself to breathe. She was 27 years old. She had a graduate degree in environmental law. She had run a half marathon 2 years ago in the rain alone and finished it. She had survived her mother's funeral with her jaw clenched and her eyes dry because her mother had always said crying in public was just asking strangers for something they couldn't give you. She was not a woman who fell apart, but her hands were shaking. She looked at them and couldn't make them stop. 3 hours ago, she had been sitting on the edge of Declan's desk, not at it. She never sat at it. That was his rule among a long list of rules she had absorbed so slowly she hadn't noticed the bars going up. And she'd been trying to find a phone charger in the bottom drawer when her fingers touched a small, external drive she had never seen before. Matte black. No label. The kind of thing that looked deliberately forgettable. She should have put it back. She knew that now. She understood it in the same visceral way she understood that she should not have been born to a woman who drank, should not have taken the scholarship that landed her in the same property law seminar as Declan Pierce, should not have let herself be dazzled by a man who bought her a first edition novel on their third date and looked at her like she was something he'd been looking for without knowing he was looking. Should-haves didn't change anything. She'd found a laptop in the bag beneath the desk and plugged the drive in because she'd thought, what? That it was a client file he'd forgotten to brief her on? That maybe she could help? That was the version of herself she was still trying to shake. The one who'd believed she had a role here beyond looking good at charity dinners and not asking questions about the business meetings that ran until 2 in the morning. The files had opened without a password prompt. She didn't understand all of what she was reading. The financial structures were dense, layered through shell companies in 4 countries, and the legal abbreviations weren't all ones she recognized. But she understood enough. She understood words like wire transfer and suppressed testimony and body recovery. Lake Calumet confirmed. She understood a name she had heard on the local news 8 months ago, a city alderman who had died in what the papers called a boating accident, appearing in an email chain as a liability that had been resolved. She understood that the man she was engaged to marry had not made his money in tech. She'd had approximately 90 seconds to absorb this before she heard the elevator. She got the drive out, closed the laptop, and was back on the couch with a magazine she couldn't read by the time Declan walked in. She'd smiled at him. He'd kissed her on the temple, which was a thing he did now instead of the mouth, and she'd smiled again, and her face hadn't given her away because she'd spent years learning to keep her face from giving her away, which was maybe the most useful thing her childhood had taught her. She thought she was safe. She had not been safe. She didn't know how he knew. Maybe he had sensors on the drive. Maybe one of the building's cameras had a sightline to the desk that she hadn't accounted for. Maybe he just read her the way he always claimed he could. That thing he said in the beginning, "You can't hide from me, Ro. I see right through you," which she had thought was romantic and was now understanding as something else entirely. What she knew was that 40 minutes after he arrived home, 2 men she'd never seen before appeared in the apartment, not introduced, not explained. Just there, flanking the front door, in dark clothes with the particular stillness of men who were comfortable waiting. Declan had taken her phone. He'd done it gently. That was what kept replaying. He'd held out his hand with that expression he used in board meetings, patient and absolute, and said, "I need that for a while." And she'd handed it over before she'd fully processed what was happening. Because that was the thing about control that got built slowly. By the time you recognized it, your instincts had already been rewired. He'd told her to get some rest. He'd closed the bedroom door. She had stood in the bathroom for 20 minutes trying to decide if she was overreacting. She was not overreacting. The files were real. The men by the door were real. The way Declan had looked at her when she handed him the phone, a look she'd never seen on him before, flat and assessing, like she was a variable he was calculating. That was real, too. Rowan opened the cabinet beneath the sink. Cleaning supplies, spare toiletries, a box of cotton swabs. She'd found it 6 weeks ago when she was looking for touch-up concealer before a dinner, a backup phone, small and old, the kind that didn't require a biometric scan to unlock. She'd thought it was Declan's spare. She'd put it back and forgotten about it. She took it out now, turned it on. The screen lit up. No signal. She moved to the far corner, the one that sat closest to the exterior wall, and pressed herself into the angle between the tub and the tile, and the signal bar flickered up to 1. She had 1 bar and shaking hands and no clear idea of who she was going to call. Her sister was in Portland. Her friend Kara was someone Declan had slowly made her spend less time with, a gradual gravitational pull away from the people who might have asked uncomfortable questions. She had her mother's old lawyer, but that was an office number, and it was almost 11 at night, and she had no reason to believe he would understand what she was asking him to walk into. She opened a new text message and started typing from memory. Kara's number, the one she'd had for 9 years, the last 4 digits were 2784. She was certain of that much. She typed the area code wrong. She didn't know she'd typed it wrong. Her hands were not working correctly, and the light in here was bad, and she typed fast because she could hear footsteps somewhere in the apartment moving in the direction of the bedroom. Please help me. I'm being held against my will. I don't have much time. Please, she sent it. Then she sat on the cold floor with her knees pulled up and the phone against her chest and waited, which was the worst part. Worse than fear, worse than the shaking, just the waiting with nowhere to put any of it. The reply came in 40 seconds. Who is this? Not a question, no punctuation. A statement that expected an answer. Rowan stared at it. The number wasn't one she recognized, but at this point, recognition didn't matter. Someone was there. Someone had read it and responded in 40 seconds, which meant they were holding their phone, which meant they were awake, which meant she wasn't sending words into nothing. My name is Rowan. I'm at 1400 North Lakeshore Drive, 53rd floor. My fiancé has taken my phone and there are men blocking the door. I think he's going to hurt me. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Are you injured? Not yet. How many men? She stopped. The question was wrong for someone who was calling 911. The question was wrong for a friend, for a neighbor, for any civilian reading a stranger's panic text in the middle of the night. It was a specific, tactical question, and the fact that it appeared that quickly, phrased that cleanly, meant something about the person on the other end that she didn't have time to fully examine. She answered anyway. 2 at the front door. I don't know about the rest of the apartment. He has security. Don't move, don't make noise. Do not under any circumstances leave the bathroom. I'm coming. She read it 3 times. The footsteps outside the door stopped. Rowan, Declan's voice just on the other side of the door. Pleasant. The version of his voice he used in public. Come out and have a drink with me. She shoved the phone between her body and the back wall of the tub, pressing herself flat. I'm getting ready for bed, she said. Her voice came out almost even. A pause. Take your time, he said. The footsteps moved away. She pulled the phone back out and stared at the last message. I'm coming. From a number she didn't know. From someone who had asked how many men like it was a relevant operational question. She typed, Who are you? The answer came back in under 10 seconds. Someone who's going to get you out. That's all you need to know right now. Luciano De Luca was in the back of a black Escalade on the I-90 when the text arrived, and he almost didn't read it. He had 17 unread messages that night. His operations manager, his lawyer, 2 of his captains, a food supply vendor who had made the mistake of contacting him directly, and he'd been going through them in order, methodically, the way he did everything, because chaos was what happened to men who didn't have systems. He was 41 years old. He had been in positions of consequence since he was 22, and he had learned early that panic was a choice, and information was a resource, And the men who lost were almost always the men who moved before they understood what they were moving into. The text appeared between a message about a shipment delay and one from his lawyer about a deposition scheduled for the following month. He read it, looked at the number, didn't recognize it. He almost sent back wrong number and kept moving. He didn't know why he didn't. He'd tried to explain it to himself in the months that followed, and the explanation never quite landed. Something about the phrasing, the period instead of a question mark, the specific detail of 53rd floor, the way the text read like someone typing with one hand pressed against a wall. Most prank texts had a looseness to them, a confidence. This read like someone who was trying to stay small. He asked about injuries, he asked about personnel. And the answers that came back were clean and specific and frightened and real. He lowered the phone. Caruso. His driver's eyes found him in the rear view. 1400 North Lake Shore. How fast? 14 minutes, maybe 10. Make it 10. Across the seat from him, his second-in-command Enzo Vitali looked up from his own phone. He was 45, thick through the shoulders, and he had a particular expression he used when Luciano did something he didn't yet have context for. Patient, watchful, filing information away. Problem, Enzo said. Luciano showed him the screen. Enzo read it again. Could be anything. Could be? You're going anyway. Yes. He was already on his own phone. 2 calls, 90 seconds, the 4 men in the second vehicle behind them, the contact he kept at a private database that pulled address registrations and building security schematics. The address resolved to a residential tower, penthouse floor, registered to a holding company. He pulled the holding company, and it had subsidiaries, and he pulled those, and inside 3 minutes he had a name. Declan Pierce. Tech investment. 15 years of clean public record, the kind of clean that takes effort. Luciano sat with that for a moment. He knew the name. Not personally. Declan Pierce moved in circles that maintained a polished distance from what Luciano's world looked like on the ground. But there had been conversations over the years at the edges of negotiations he'd been involved in. Money that moved through structures he recognized from his own industry. The kind of financial architecture that only made sense if you already understood what it was hiding. He pulled up an encrypted line to a contact who owed him a favor from 3 years ago. A man who worked in federal financial crimes and occasionally traded information for the particular kind of protection that government employment couldn't provide. He sent a name and an address and 3 words. What do you have? The response took 4 minutes and came back long. Luciano read it once, then he read it again more slowly. Enzo, he said. Yeah. Pierce has been laundering through intermediary structures for at least 6 years. 3 of them are operations we've had indirect contact with. He looked up. He's also flagged in connection with 4 disappearances, people who worked near him, people who knew too much. Enzo said nothing for a moment, then, the woman. She found something. He knows she found it. And she texted a wrong number. And I picked up. The Escalade pulled off the highway. The rain was thicker here, close to the lake, and the lights from the tower were visible through the windshield, a column of lit windows stacked against the dark sky. Luciano hadn't left a vehicle to personally involve himself in something like this in 3 years. He had people. That was the entire architecture of the life he'd built. People who handled things, layers between him and any given situation. Deniability wasn't vanity, it was survival. He was already opening the door before Caruso had fully stopped. He didn't examine why. He kept moving instead. Inside the bathroom on the 53rd floor, Rowan sat on the cold tile and watched the minutes pass on the backup phone's clock. 12 minutes since the last message. 14. The apartment had gone quiet in the way that felt curated. She knew Declan well enough to know the difference between him actually stepping back and him making himself seem further away than he was. She heard the elevator at 11:47, and then she heard voices she didn't recognize. And then she heard Declan's voice, very close to the bathroom door, stripped of every social layer, saying something in a low, controlled tone that she couldn't fully make out but that contained the word now, and the sound of footsteps moving fast, and she pressed herself flat against the back wall of the tub, with the phone dark in her hand because she couldn't think of anything else to do. The bathroom door came off its hinges. Not broken down. Removed. Deliberately, efficiently, the way a person removes something when they have both the tools and the intention and no interest in drama beyond the task. A man she had never seen stood in the doorway. Tall, dark coat, water still on his shoulders from the rain. He had the kind of face that had been through things, not ugly, not soft, just marked, like a landscape that had seen weather. His eyes found her immediately and stayed there. "Rowan Vale," he said. It wasn't a question. She couldn't find her voice. "I need you to get up," he said. "We have a short window and I'd rather not carry you." She got up. She didn't consciously decide to. Her body simply responded to something in his voice that she would spend a long time trying to name. Not kindness exactly, but a particular quality of certainty that the situation was manageable, which was the one thing she needed most and had least of. She was almost at the doorway when Declan's voice came from the other room, controlled and cold and wrong in every register. "Luciano." A pause. "This is a misunderstanding." "I know what it is," the man in the doorway said without turning around. He reached back and closed his hand once, briefly, around Rowan's wrist, not restraining, just steadying. And then he stepped through the door and she followed him because there was no version of this where she didn't. The living room was a different place than it had been an hour ago. Two of the men she didn't know were standing near the front entrance. The two who had been there before were not visible anymore, and she chose not to think too hard about why. Declan stood in the center of the room in a silk shirt she had watched him put on that morning. His jaw was set. His hands were loose at his sides. He was working hard to look like a man in a meeting rather than a man who had run out of options, and he was almost succeeding. "She's my fiancée," he said. "She's confused. She's been under a lot of stress." "She texted me," the man said, cutting through it with a flatness that made the words meaningless. "You understand what that means. She texted the wrong number. Right number now." He looked at Declan for a long moment, something working behind his eyes that Rowan couldn't read, but that made Declan's jaw tighten incrementally. "We're leaving. Don't follow us tonight. Use the time to make better decisions." Declan's eyes moved to Rowan. The look lasted 2 seconds. It was the longest 2 seconds she could remember. "This isn't over," he said. "No," the man agreed. "It isn't." The elevator doors closed. Rowan stood next to a man she had never met, descending toward the street, soaking wet from a bathroom floor, with nothing but a backup phone and the dress she'd been wearing for 12 hours, and she thought she should say something. Thank you, or who are you, or what happens next? But all she could do was breathe, just breathe, because that was already more than she'd been certain she'd be doing tonight. The lobby arrived. The doors opened. She followed him through the glass doors into the rain. She didn't look back. 3 hours later, in a car she didn't recognize moving through streets she didn't know. Her phone, the backup, which she still held, lit up with a text from a number she recognized. Declan's number. "You have no idea what you've walked into. Come back. It's the only way this ends well for you." She stared at it. Then she looked at the man sitting across from her in the dark car, rain streaming down the windows behind him, and she thought, he said the same thing. It isn't over. What she didn't know yet, what she had no way of knowing, was that the files she'd found on that drive contained a name, one that had nothing to do with Declan's corporations, one that would change everything about why this man had come for her. And when she found out what it was, nothing about the last 12 hours would look the same. The car didn't have a name on the side. It didn't have plates that meant anything. Rowan knew enough now to understand that these were not accidents. She sat in the back seat with her knees pressed together and her hands folded in her lap because she needed something to do with them. And she watched the city slide past the rain-blurred window and tried to take inventory of herself the way she used to after bad depositions. Facts only, no interpretation, just what is true right now. She was physically unharmed. She was moving away from the building. She was in a vehicle with a man whose last name she'd heard for the first time 20 minutes ago when Declan had said it like a warning. Luciano. He was on the phone. He'd been on the phone since they hit the street, speaking in a low, clipped Italian that she didn't have enough of to follow. His eyes moved to her once, briefly, during what sounded like an argument, and then moved away. He wasn't checking on her. He was cataloging her position the way you'd note a variable that still needed handling. She looked back down at Declan's text. Come back. It's the only way this ends well for you. She turned the phone face down against her thigh. The man across from her, Enzo, she'd gathered from the way Luciano said the name, sharp and short, was watching her with the particular stillness of someone who'd learned that watching was more useful than talking. He was big in the shoulders and quiet in the way that suggested it was a choice rather than a default. He had a cut above his left eyebrow that was still fresh, maybe an hour old, and he hadn't done anything about it. You should put something on that, she said. He looked at her. The cut, she said. He reached up and touched it like he'd forgotten it was there. I've had worse. That's not really the point. He almost smiled. Not quite. Luciano ended the call. He set the phone face up on the seat beside him and looked at her with his full attention for the first time since the elevator, and she understood immediately why Declan had said his name the way he had. There was a quality to his focus that was different from most people's. Not aggressive, not performed, just complete, like a door with no gaps in it. Where's the drive? He said. She blinked. What? The drive you found, where is it? I didn't take it. I put it back before he came home. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, exactly. Recalculation. You put it back. I panicked. I thought if it was back where I found it, he wouldn't know I'd seen it. She paused. That didn't work. No, he said. It didn't. He picked his phone back up and typed something. What did you read? Enough. Specifically, she looked at him. The car moved through a yellow light and the rain eased slightly, and she thought about what Kara had said to her once, years ago, after Rowan had gotten out of a situation badly by refusing to read what was in front of her face. You see what you want to see until you can't anymore, and by then it costs you. Financial transfers through at least 4 offshore structures, she said, references to suppressed testimony in what looked like a regulatory proceeding, an email chain that mentioned a name, Alderman Crest, I think, and used the word resolved. There was a notation that referenced body recovery at Lake Calumet. Luciano was quiet. And a folder I didn't get into before I heard the elevator, she said. It was labeled with a name, first name only, Marco. The car went very still. Not the people in it, they didn't move noticeably, but something in the atmosphere of the car changed, a pressure drop, the kind you felt before weather. Enzo turned his head slowly and looked at Luciano. Luciano was looking at the window. What? She said. Nothing, he said. That's not nothing. You both just... I heard you. He turned back and the recalculation was still happening behind his eyes, faster now, and whatever it was landing on, it wasn't making things simpler. We'll talk about it when we're somewhere that isn't moving. They pulled into an underground structure 40 minutes later. She'd lost track of where they were, north side somewhere. The street signage had been sparse, and the car stopped in a bay that held 3 other vehicles, all dark, all the same flavor of deliberate anonymity. The building above them was old, industrial bones with money poured into the bones. She'd worked with enough real estate developers to read a conversion project, and this one was thorough. The elevator inside was smooth and silent, which meant it was new, but the walls around it were raw concrete and the ceiling had reinforced ductwork that hadn't been prettied up. The apartment on the 6th floor was the size of a modest house. Open floor plan, concrete and steel, and very little softness in the materials, but there was a couch that looked like it had been sat in by someone who actually needed it, and a kitchen that had been used by a person rather than staged for a photo. She registered these things. She registered the windows, blacked out, and the door they'd come through, reinforced, 2 locks she could see and probably others she couldn't, and she registered the fact that she was noting all of this and understood what it meant about her current mental state. She was mapping exits. She was doing it automatically. She sat down at the kitchen table because her legs were done, and she was not going to let anyone in this room see them go before she was seated. Luciano put his jacket over a chair. He was wearing a dark shirt underneath, no tie. Sleeves he rolled up before he said anything else. The gesture was so ordinary that it caught her slightly off guard. A man rolling up his sleeves in a kitchen at midnight, like the next thing was doing dishes. "You need water," he said. It wasn't a question. "I need to know what's happening." He got a glass from a cabinet, filled it from the tap, and set it in front of her. "Drink it first." She drank it. She was thirstier than she'd realized. He sat down across from her. Enzo stayed standing near the counter, which she was starting to understand was his natural position in any given room, slightly to the side, slightly behind the main event, watching. "Declan Pierce has been building a secondary financial structure for approximately 6 years, Luciano said. "Clean money goes in through the tech companies. Dirty money comes out through the offshore holding network you saw on the drive. The amounts aren't small." "How do you know the amounts?" "Because I've seen this architecture before. Different names, same blueprint." He held her eyes. "He's been connected to criminal operations on the financial side, not running them, servicing them." "And you," she said, "which side are you on?" The silence lasted exactly long enough to be honest. "I run operations," he said. "I have since I was 22. What that means specifically isn't something I'm going to walk you through tonight, but I want you to understand that I'm not a banker for it, and I'm not a politician for it. What Declan does and what I do aren't the same thing. But they're related. In the way that a river and a reservoir are related. Yes." She pressed her palms flat against the table. "Then why are you helping me?" "Because you texted me." "That's not a reason." "It's the reason I picked up," he said. "The reason I stayed is different." She waited. "The name in that folder," he said. "Marco." "Who is he?" Luciano looked at his hands for a moment. They were still. Everything about him was still in a way that took control, not someone who was naturally still, someone who had decided to be. "My brother," he said, "younger by 5 years. He died 4 years ago. The official story was an accident during a financial transfer negotiation that went wrong." He looked up. "I never believed the official story." She sat with that. "His name on Declan's drive," she said, "means Pierce had information about what happened, or involvement, or both." "You don't know which?" "Not yet." She pressed her thumb against the edge of the glass and stared at the waterline. Her mind was doing the thing it did in arguments she hadn't prepared for, moving fast through the information and trying to find the load-bearing fact, the one thing that, if she understood it correctly, made the rest of it coherent. "So you came for me," she said, "but you stayed for him." "Yes." "And that makes me what? Leverage?" His jaw moved. "It makes you a witness. And it makes you someone he's going to come after, which means keeping you alive is currently the most efficient way to get to what I need." She almost laughed. It came out wrong, thin and a little damaged, but she appreciated that he hadn't lied to her, because she'd had enough of that particular comfort to last her for quite a while. "At least you're honest about it," she said. "I find it saves time." A phone on the counter buzzed. Enzo looked at it, and the expression on his face did something she'd been watching faces do enough tonight to read. "What?" Luciano said, without looking at him. "Pierce moved," Enzo said. "He's not at the building." "Where?" "TAC team lost him 2 blocks north. He was in a vehicle we didn't have plates for." Enzo set the phone down. "He had 30 minutes of lead time while we were moving her. That was enough." Luciano was quiet. "He has somewhere else," Rowan said. Both men looked at her. "He has somewhere else he goes," she said. "I saw calendar entries sometimes. Blocked out, no labels, irregular intervals. I asked about them once, early on, and he said it was client meetings. I believed him." She stopped. "He talked about a property out of state once. In passing. He said his family had land somewhere in the mountains. I didn't think about it again." "Mountains," Luciano said. "I don't know where. He never said specifically." Luciano stood. He moved to the window, which he knew was blacked out and therefore pointless. But people moved to windows when they needed to think, and she understood that. He stood with his back to the room for a moment, and she watched the tension in his shoulders do something complicated. "He's going to run," Enzo said. "If he runs, the drive goes with him. Everything on it." "He won't run yet," Luciano said. "Not without cleaning up." The word cleaning landed in the room with a weight that everyone understood without defining it. "She's the loose end," Enzo said. "She's the only loose end left that he can actually reach," Luciano said. "Everything else is embedded. But she saw the drive. She knows what's on it. And now she's connected to me, which means Pierce knows I know. Rowan kept her face flat. She was aware this was a conversation happening partially over her head and partially directly at her, and she was choosing to receive it as information rather than insult, because insult was a luxury and information was what she actually needed. "So what happens now?" she said. Luciano turned from the window. "I have people pulling property records in 3 states for anything connected to Pierce's holding companies. If he has land in the mountains, we'll find it. And when you find it, then we go have a conversation with him about my brother." "That's not a plan," she said. "That's an intention." Something crossed his face that might have been, in a less controlled person, a small flash of genuine surprise. It was there and gone in under a second, and then he was watching her with what she was beginning to think of as his real expression. Not blank, not hard, just extremely focused on whatever she was actually saying rather than the general situation she represented. "What would you call it?" he said. "What I'd call it requires knowing what you actually want out of this. Justice, information, money, personal satisfaction. Those are different problems and they have different solutions, and if you mix them up, you get bad outcomes." "You're a lawyer," he said. It wasn't an accusation, more like a piece of information clicking into place. "I was training to be." "Environmental." "Yes, which is not remotely relevant except that I know how federal investigations work, and I know what evidence has to look like to be usable, and I know that whatever's on that drive, if it's what I read, is the kind of thing the FBI has been trying to build for years. And I know that a man with your—" She paused, choosing operational profile walking into a federal situation without a structured agreement in place is walking in with nothing. The room was quiet. Enzo was looking at Luciano. Luciano was looking at Rowan. "What kind of structured agreement?" he said. "The kind where what you have is worth something to them and you know what you want in return before you make the first call." She put both hands on the table. "I've watched enough environmental enforcement cases to know that cooperation agreements that get made reactively are worth half what preemptive ones are. If you're going to bring Declan down, and from everything you've just told me, you need what's on that drive to do it, then you need a lawyer who knows how to structure what you're offering, and I need immunity for what I witnessed tonight, which is not nothing." Luciano sat back down. He looked at her across the table for a long time. "You just got out of a penthouse prison," he said. "You don't have shoes on. You've been shaking for the last 2 hours." "I know," she said. "I'm still right." The buzz came again from Enzo's phone. He read it this time without looking up before he spoke. "Luciano, the property search." A pause. "It's not 3 states. Pierce has a registered structure in Wyoming, 1,400 acres. The holding company bought it 18 months ago, same week the Alderman Crest story broke." Luciano didn't look away from Rowan. "That's where he'll go," she said. "Yes. And if he gets there before you reach him, he disappears the drive and everything on it." Luciano stood. "Including the folder." She understood. Marco's folder. 4 years of unanswered questions sitting inside a black drive in a penthouse that Declan Pierce was now racing away from in a car with plates they didn't have toward a compound in the mountains of Wyoming. "I can identify the location of the drive," she said. "I know the desk, the drawer, the laptop bag. If your people are still at the building, Pierce will have people there too. Then you need to move faster than he does." Luciano reached for his jacket. Enzo was already on his phone. Rowan stood up on legs that were not fully reliable and found that they held her anyway, which was something. "I'm going with you," she said. "No," Luciano said without pausing. "I'm the only person who can identify exactly where—" "I said no." "Luciano." She said his name for the first time and he stopped. She hadn't planned it. It was simply the word that cut through. "He has people at that building who know my face. Your people don't. I know the apartment layout. Every room, every camera, where the security panel is, which elevator opens where. You need me in there." He turned around. He looked at her for 5 seconds. She counted. You understand what you're walking back into, he said. Yes. If this goes wrong, it was already going wrong before tonight, she said. I just didn't know it yet. He held her gaze for another 2 seconds, and then he nodded, once, the kind of nod that was also a door closing on the option of going back. Stay close, he said. Do exactly what I say when I say it, not a half second later. Understood. And put some shoes on, Enzo. Enzo was already opening a closet near the entryway. He produced a pair of dark sneakers, set them on the floor without comment. She sat down, pulled them on. They were slightly too big. She laced them tight. When she stood back up, Luciano was at the door, jacket on, phone in hand, running through something she couldn't see on the screen. He looked up once, and something passed through his eyes that was almost something other than strategy. It was gone before she could name it. The elevator descended. Somewhere across the city, in a car moving fast toward an airport she didn't know about yet, Declan Pierce was making the phone call that would change the shape of the next 12 hours. The call that would tell the two men already positioned inside the penthouse that the drive needed to disappear before morning and that the woman who had read it needed to disappear with it. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have calculated from the information he had, was that Rowan Vale had already been in a room with the one person in Chicago who had both the resources and the personal reason to burn everything Declan had built to the ground. And she had just agreed to walk back through his door to help him do it. The building looked the same from the outside. That was the thing that got her, standing in the back of the Escalade half a block south, with Luciano's shoulder 6 inches from hers, and the rain finally easing to something that was more mist than water. 47 floors of glass and steel, and the lobby lights still burning warm and gold the way they always did. The kind of building that looked like safety from the street, like money and stability and the absence of bad things. She had felt that when she first moved in. She had been grateful for it. That memory sat in her chest now like something lodged wrong. How many of your people are already inside? She said. 2, lobby level. They've been there since we left. Pierce's security will have the stairwells. I know. The service elevator requires a staff key card. There's a panel behind the concierge desk. Bottom drawer, left side. The building manager keeps a spare there because the regular staff lose them constantly. I saw him get it twice. Luciano looked at her. I paid attention, she said. I didn't know why at the time. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, Enzo. And Enzo, in the front seat, relayed it in 2 sentences to whoever was on the other end of his earpiece. The plan, such as it was, had been built in the car on the way over. Luciano's 2 men inside would neutralize Pierce's security on the lobby level. Rowan and Luciano would take the service elevator to 52, walk the maintenance corridor to the stairwell, go up 1 floor. The apartment door, she knew the code, a 6-digit sequence Declan had never bothered to change because he'd assumed she had no reason to use it without him. She knew it because she had watched him enter it 400 times, and she had a memory that retained numbers without being asked to. What she didn't know was what they were walking into on the other side. He could have people still in there, she said. Yes. The drive might already be gone. It might. And if it is? Luciano didn't answer right away, which told her more than an answer would have. Then we find another way, he said. That's not what you actually think. He turned and looked at her fully. The light from the street was enough to see his face, and she'd been learning to read it over the last 2 hours. The way the stillness wasn't blankness. The way things moved underneath it if you watched the right places. No, he said. It's not what I think, but it's what I'm saying to keep you from making a different calculation right now. She appreciated that too. She didn't say so. They went in through the parking structure. Enzo stayed with the vehicles. Luciano's man at the lobby. She never got his name, just a face, mid-30s, dark jacket, the same particular stillness she was starting to recognize as a type, handed Luciano the key card without a word exchanged. The concierge desk was empty. The other man was not visible, and she didn't ask where he was. The service elevator smelled like cleaning supplies and the mechanical effort of the building, the honest smell of the infrastructure that kept the luxury part running. The ride to 52 took 90 seconds. Luciano stood slightly in front of her and to the left, which she understood was tactical, and tried not to find as reassuring as she did. The maintenance corridor was narrow and lit by fluorescent strips, and it had the slightly unreal quality of all back-of-house spaces in expensive buildings. The sense that the building had two identities and you were currently inside the one it didn't advertise. She counted the doors. The stairwell access was the third on the right. He went up first. The door at 53 opened onto the residential corridor, and for a moment she just smelled it. That particular air of the floor she'd lived on for 14 months, neutral and climate-controlled and faintly expensive. And her body did something involuntary, a kind of flinch that wasn't physical, just a recalibration of every signal she'd spent the last few hours building. She pushed it down. She kept moving. The apartment door was 12 feet from the stairwell. Luciano positioned himself to the side of the frame and looked at her. She stepped forward and put in the code, 6 digits. The lock disengaged. He went in first. She was 2 steps behind him, and she had just enough time to register that the living room was dark. All the lights that had been burning when she left were off, which was wrong, which was the first wrong thing, before Luciano's arm came back across her chest and stopped her. 2 seconds. The lights came on. Not the normal ambient light of the apartment, overheads. Harsh and complete. There was a man sitting in the chair by the window, not one of the security staff she recognized, older, 50s, in a dark suit with the jacket open. He had a glass of something amber on the table beside him, and his legs were crossed, and he looked, more than anything, like a man who had been waiting for a while and was comfortable with waiting. He looked at Luciano first, then at Rowan. "Luciano," he said, "I was wondering which door you'd use." Luciano didn't move. His arms stayed across her. "Tanner," he said. The name came out flat and without texture, which she'd learned in the last few hours meant the opposite of how it sounded. "It's been a long time," the man said. "Sit down. Where's the drive?" "We'll get to that." He picked up his glass. "Sit down, both of you. This is going to be a longer conversation than you've planned for." Rowan looked at Luciano's profile. The muscle in his jaw was doing something she hadn't seen it do yet. "Who is he?" she said, low. Luciano said nothing for a moment, then, "Richard Tanner. He runs the Federal Financial Crimes Division out of the Chicago field office." She went very still. The man, Tanner, smiled at her. It was a professional smile, practiced and functionally warm. "Ms. Vale, I've been reading your file for about 6 months. I'm sorry we're meeting like this." "You're FBI," she said. "I am." "Then you're here to help." The smile didn't change. "I'm here to do my job. Those aren't always the same thing." Luciano moved then forward into the room, and she followed because the arm had dropped. He didn't sit. He stood in the middle of the living room with his hands loose at his sides and looked at Tanner the way she imagined he looked at people when he'd already calculated everything in the room and didn't like the calculation. "The drive," Luciano said again. "Is in evidence custody as of 43 minutes ago," Tanner said, "along with the laptop, the bag, and several other items from this apartment." The room held that for a second. "You were already here," Luciano said. "We've had a monitoring order on this apartment for 9 weeks. When the phone activity spiked tonight and Pierce moved, we accelerated the timeline." He set down his glass. "We've had eyes on Pierce for 2 years, Luciano. The financial architecture, the offshore structures, the Alderman Crest connection. We've had most of it. What we didn't have was the internal documentation that proves direct authorization." He paused. "What was on that drive gives us that." "Then you have what you need," Luciano said. "We'll leave." "Not quite yet." Luciano stopped. Tanner stood. He was taller than he looked sitting, and the easy manner shifted slightly when he was on his feet, something more structural underneath it. "The drive has what we need on Pierce. 18 months of direct authorization documentation. Enough for RICO, if we want it, which we do." He put his hands in his jacket pockets. "It also has something else. Something I think you came here specifically for." The silence stretched. "My brother," Luciano said. "The Marco DeLuca file." Tanner looked at him steadily. "I know what you were told. I know you've believed for 4 years that it was the criminal network that had him killed, that Pierce had involvement. He paused. I need you to sit down before I tell you the rest. Tell me standing. Tanner looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Rowan, briefly, and she understood that look. It was the look of someone deciding how much of a thing to say in front of a variable they hadn't fully accounted for. She stays, Luciano said. Tanner accepted that. He moved to the window, put his back to the view he couldn't see because the city was behind the glass and he was facing the room, and he said it without preamble. Marco DeLuca was an FBI informant. He had been for 14 months before he died. The apartment was silent enough that she could hear the ventilation. Luciano's expression didn't change. That was the most frightening thing she'd seen all night. He came to us, Tanner continued, voluntarily. He wanted out of the organization and he was willing to trade information for structured immunity. He was a good informant, careful, reliable, and he had access that took us years to build toward from the outside. He paused. His cover held for over a year. And then it didn't, Luciano said. His voice was completely level. His identity was compromised. We don't fully know how, even now. There was a breach in the handling chain. Another pause. He was killed within 72 hours of the breach. Pierce's organization facilitated it, not as the principal, as a service. The order came from inside your own network. Rowan held her breath. Luciano turned away. He walked 3 steps toward the window and stopped. His back was to the room. Who? He said. That's the part I need to be careful about, Tanner said, because the person who compromised Marco's identity is someone who has been inside your organization for the entirety of the 4 years since. She watched Luciano's shoulders. They didn't move. Nothing about him moved. Who? He said again. Enzo Vitali, Tanner said. He's been a paid FBI informant since 6 months before Marco died. We believe the compromise was accidental. He didn't know Marco was also working with us. But the information he passed that week trying to protect his own position was enough for someone inside your network to identify Marco as a leak. He kept his voice measured, clinical. We can't prove intent, we can prove information transfer. And we can prove that in the 4 years since, Vitali has been deliberately feeding us incomplete intelligence to maintain his position with us while protecting your operation. Rowan looked at the door. Enzo was downstairs. Enzo, who had ridden with them from the beginning. Enzo, who had been on his phone constantly. Enzo, who had known every step of what they were doing tonight. He knows we're here, she said. Tanner looked at her. Yes. He's been reporting to you tonight. He's been reporting to a contact. Whether that information has been coming to us accurately, I honestly couldn't tell you. He said it with a directness she didn't expect. Vitali is a man who serves his own survival above everything else. Right now he's probably trying to calculate which outcome tonight keeps him safest. And which one does, she said. Tanner's expression didn't shift. Luciano turned around. She had been watching his face all night, and she had learned its vocabulary, and what she saw now was something she had never seen on it before. Not rage, not grief, not calculation. Something underneath all of those things. The thing that existed before a person decided how to respond to something that had fundamentally reordered what they knew to be true about the last 4 years of their life. You sat on this for 4 years, he said to Tanner. We were building a case. My brother was dead and you were building a case. Your brother made a choice to work with us. That choice came with risks that he understood. He was 26 years old. Yes, Tanner said, and to his credit, he didn't dress that up. Luciano crossed the room in 5 steps, and Rowan moved without thinking, putting herself 1 step to the left, not between them, but close enough that it changed the geometry of the room, and something about that movement made Luciano stop. He looked at her. She didn't say anything, she just held his eyes. He stopped. He stood there for 4 seconds, and she could see him doing something that cost him something, pulling back from an edge that he'd been moving toward without making a decision to move. He pulled back. He breathed once, slowly, through his nose. What do you want from this? He said to Tanner. His voice was back to flat. Cooperation, Tanner said, from both of you. Ms. Vale, you're a material witness to Pierce's documents. We need a formal statement, and we need you available for proceedings. In return, you get full immunity for anything connected to tonight." He looked at Luciano. "From you, I need the financial operational records from the last 3 years. The accounts, the structures, the movement records. In return, I'm prepared to offer a conversation about the scope of federal interest in your specific activities going forward." "A conversation," Luciano said. "It's the most I can offer tonight. It would be more tomorrow, and significantly less if Pierce gets to Wyoming before we can intercept." "Is he already moving on Wyoming?" "We have people on the road, but Pierce has a 2-hour lead and a private aircraft registration we didn't have until 40 minutes ago." Tanner picked up his glass again. "This drive, what Rowan found, it's the documentation spine of the whole prosecution. But without Pierce in custody to face it, it's a slower process. The mountain compound has an archive room. If he gets there and burns it, the drive is circumstantial, and the case extends by 2 years minimum." Rowan looked at Luciano. He was looking at the floor with his jaw set, and she could see him working through something that had too many moving pieces: grief, betrayal, tactical calculation, and she thought about what she'd said in the kitchen. Those are different problems, and they have different solutions. "He needs to go to Wyoming," she said. Both men looked at her. "Not the FBI," she said. "Not officially. Not yet. If Pierce sees federal vehicles, he destroys the archive and lawyers up, and you spend 2 years building it back." She looked at Tanner. "But if someone gets to the compound before your people do, without a federal signature, I cannot authorize." "Mom, I'm not asking you to authorize it." She looked at him steadily. "I'm asking you how long it takes your intercept team to reach that compound." Tanner was quiet for a moment. 6 hours? Maybe 7. She looked at Luciano. "How long for you?" He met her eyes. 4.5? "And Enzo," she said. Luciano's expression shifted. "He's downstairs," she said. "He's been running information all night. If he knows we found the Wyoming address..." Luciano's hand went to his phone. He was already moving toward the door. "The evidence on that drive," Rowan said to Tanner quickly. "Marco's folder. What's in it?" Tanner looked at her. "Tell me what's in it," she said. "He's going to walk out that door and go after Pierce, and he deserves to know what he's walking toward." Tanner set his glass down. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded sheet. Not the drive, a printout, something he'd prepared, and held it out without walking it to her. She crossed the room and took it. She read it in 15 seconds. Then she walked to the door where Luciano had stopped with his hand on the frame, and she held it out to him. He took it. He read it. Marco's file. 4 years old. The last operational note his brother had ever filed with his FBI handler, written 71 hours before he died. A note that named the person inside Luciano's network who had been making the operation's financial decisions in ways that never quite made sense. A name that appeared in Pierce's ledger twice, in connection with wire transfers that moved money through structures outside Luciano's authorized network. The name on the page was Enzo Vitali. Not an accident. Not a cascade of incomplete information that had accidentally gotten Marco killed. A deliberate containment. Enzo had known Marco was a leak. He had fed the information knowing what it would trigger. He had stood at Marco's funeral, and he had ridden in this car tonight, and he had been on the phone, constantly, the whole time. Luciano folded the paper once. He put it in his jacket pocket. He looked at Rowan. 4.5 hours to Wyoming, she said. If we leave now. This is not, Tanner started. You have 6 hours before your people arrive, Rowan said, without turning around. If we get there first and Pierce is in custody by the time your team lands, you have your arrest, you have the archive, and you have everything you need for proceedings. She paused. Or you can stop us right now and spend 6 hours hoping Pierce doesn't burn it all before you get there. The room held that. Tanner said nothing. Rowan looked at Luciano. We have to deal with Enzo first, she said. I know, he said. Can you? She stopped. She didn't finish the sentence because she didn't know how to finish it without asking something she wasn't sure she had the right to ask. He looked at her and understood what she hadn't said. He'll be handled, Luciano said. That's all you need to know. She nodded. They walked out of the apartment that had been her prison 12 hours ago, down the maintenance corridor, toward the service elevator, and she was aware that somewhere in the descent toward the parking level, Luciano was going to walk out of this elevator and look at the man who had been beside him for 4 years, the man who had gotten his brother killed, and she was going to be there when that happened, and she had no idea what it was going to look like. The elevator opened. Enzo was standing exactly where they'd left him. He looked at them both, his phone in his hand, and something in his face when he saw Luciano's expression did a very fast and very small rearrangement, an adjustment that was too quick to be casual and too controlled to be innocent. And in that fraction of a second, Rowan understood that he already knew. He'd known they'd found it. He'd been standing here for 20 minutes calculating his next move, and now Enzo moved first. That was the thing nobody planned for. Not Luciano, who had calculated everything else correctly, and not Rowan, who had been watching Enzo's face and reading the rearrangement happening inside it. Enzo had 45 years of survival instinct, and he read the situation in the half-second it took Luciano to clear the elevator door, and he moved before Luciano finished his first step. Not toward the exit, toward Rowan. She had time to register the decision before the arm came around her. His left, across her collarbone, yanking her back against him with a force that compressed her ribs and drove the breath out of her in a single hard expulsion. His right hand came up with a gun she hadn't seen and hadn't thought about, and she understood distantly that this was her mistake. She had been thinking like a lawyer all night. Lawyers accounted for information and leverage and procedural mechanisms. They did not, by training, account for the specific weight of a man's forearm across their sternum and the temperature of a gun barrel pressed below their jaw. Luciano stopped. The parking structure held the moment. 3 vehicles, fluorescent tubes, the smell of exhaust and concrete. Rowan's back against Enzo's chest, and Enzo's breathing audible and fast, working hard to control it, and not quite getting there, which was the only piece of information she could find that felt useful. He was scared. Scared men made mistakes. They also made fast decisions. "Put it down," Enzo said. To Luciano. Luciano hadn't drawn. His hands were at his sides, and he was looking at Enzo with an expression that had completed its journey now. All the calculation burned off. All the professional distance burned off. Something underneath it that was older and simpler and more dangerous than anything she'd seen on him tonight. "Enzo," he said. "Don't." The arm tightened. Rowan kept her body still and her chin up and made herself breathe, slow, because panic was a physiological event, and she could choose not to give her body permission for it. "I know what Tanner told you. I know what was in that file." "Then you know where we are." "I know where you think we are." His voice was shaking slightly at the edges. Not enough to be weakness, just enough to be human. "It wasn't what he told you. Marco. What happened to Marco wasn't—" "Don't," Luciano said. Same word, different temperature. The silence stretched 4 seconds. "I didn't know he was going to die," Enzo said. "I passed information to protect my position. That's all I did. What they did with it—" "You handed them his name." Luciano's voice was still level. That was the most frightening thing about it. "You handed them his name and he was dead in 72 hours, and you stood at his funeral and you looked me in the eye and you told me we would find out who did it." He paused. 18 years, Enzo." "I know." 18 years. "I know." And something in Enzo's voice cracked along a fault line that had probably been there for 4 years, a fracture held together by behavior and routine and the particular cowardice of a man who has done something irreversible and chosen to keep living as if he hasn't. "I know what I did. I've known every day. But if I came to you, if I told you, you would have—" "Yes," Luciano said. "I would have." Enzo's arm tightened again. Rowan felt her vision go slightly dim at the edges from the compression, and she forced it back, forced her focus onto the physical details. The angle of his elbow, the position of his feet behind her, slightly wider than shoulder width, balanced, which meant he'd been trained and would be hard to destabilize from the front. She was not going to be destabilized from the front. She wasn't planning on the front. She dropped. Not slowly. Not partially. She made her body go completely limp in one fast decision, all her weight surrendering downward, and the shift was enough. The arm that had been across her chest was suddenly around nothing, and she hit the concrete floor on her palms and knees, and the pain was bright and immediate, and she ignored it completely and rolled left, away from where she calculated his feet were, and came up against the wheel well of the nearest vehicle and stayed low. The gun went off. The sound in the enclosed structure was enormous. It hit her ears like something physical. She pressed herself against the car and made herself small and looked through the gap between the vehicles. Luciano had moved the same instant she dropped. Not toward her, toward Enzo, closing the distance in 3 steps that covered ground faster than she would have predicted from how he moved in ordinary circumstances. He hit Enzo's gun arm at the wrist before Enzo could recalibrate his aim, drove it upward, and the second shot went into concrete ceiling. The third didn't happen because Luciano had the wrist controlled and was inside Enzo's reach now. And the fight that followed was brutal and brief, and had the specific ugliness of 2 men who had known each other for 18 years. It wasn't clean, it wasn't skilled in any aesthetic sense. It was just force and proximity, and the terrible efficiency of rage that had found its object after 4 years of having nowhere to go. When it was over, Enzo was on the floor. He was breathing. Luciano stood over him with the gun in his own hand now, and his chest moving hard and a cut above his left eye that was bleeding into his eyebrow. He stood there for 5 seconds looking down at Enzo with something that wasn't satisfaction and wasn't mercy and wasn't grief exactly, just all 3 of them layered into something that had no clean name. Rowan got up from behind the car. Her palms were bleeding from the concrete. She looked at them briefly and then looked at Luciano. "We have to go," she said. He didn't move. "Luciano." She crossed to him. She stood beside him and looked at Enzo on the floor, conscious, eyes open, watching Luciano with the expression of a man who had made his calculations and reached the end of them. And then she looked back at Luciano. 4.5 hours to Wyoming. We have to go right now." He breathed in, breathed out. He looked at her. She held his eyes and didn't fill the silence with anything because there was nothing useful to put in it. He took out his phone, made a single call, said 3 words in Italian that she didn't know and didn't ask about. Ended the call. He walked to the Escalade. She got in. They left Enzo on the parking structure floor with whatever was coming to him arriving in its own time, and neither of them talked about it. And the city opened up ahead of them as they cleared the structure exit and turned toward the highway that would take them out of Chicago and into the dark middle of the country toward Wyoming, toward Declan Pierce and an archive room and 4 years of answers that a dead 26-year-old had tried to give his brother before someone made sure he couldn't. Rowan sat in the back seat and wrapped her bleeding palms in a cloth she found in the door pocket and looked out the window and tried to find the part of herself that had existed before tonight. Before the bathroom floor and the wrong number and the drive and the penthouse and all of it, and she couldn't locate it with any precision. It felt like something that had happened to someone adjacent to her rather than to her directly. She understood that this was shock doing what shock did, and she let it, because the alternative was feeling the full weight of the last 6 hours all at once, and she needed to be functional. "You should have that looked at," she said. His eye. "Later." "It's bleeding into your eye." He reached up and pressed the back of his hand against it without looking away from the window. Left a dark smear. "Your hands," he said. "I know." They drove. The highway unspooled ahead of them, wet and flat and orange-lit for the first hour, then darker as the city thinned and the suburbs thinned and the land started reasserting itself. The flatness of the Midwest at night with its scattered lights and its long distances between them. She fell asleep somewhere in Iowa without intending to and woke to a gas station in a different quality of dark and Luciano outside the vehicle, standing with his back to her on the phone. She got out. The air was cold and clean and smelled like nothing that had happened tonight. She went inside and bought water and something wrapped in plastic that was theoretically food and brought 2 bottles back out. He was off the phone. She held one out. He took it. "Tanner's team is 6 hours out," he said. "Estimated arrival at the compound 06:30. "What time is it?" 2:40. "Then we have 4 hours on them. If we push." He opened the water and drank half of it in one motion. "Pierce's plane landed in Casper 40 minutes ago. He's on the road to the compound." She thought about that. "He has a 2-hour head start at the compound. What's in the archive room? If he burns it, he won't burn it immediately. Luciano capped the water. He doesn't know we're coming. He thinks he neutralized me tonight by running. He thinks the FBI has the drive, and the drive is enough to make him want to disappear, but he'll want to preserve the archive because it has his own insurance in it, information on the people he's been working with. That's his leverage. He won't destroy it until he understands the full scope of what's moving toward him. And he doesn't understand that yet. Not yet. She looked up at the sky. The cloud cover had broken somewhere in the last hour, and there were stars, which she hadn't seen in months, 14 months of city living, and the city's particular refusal to let you see anything above it. "What was your brother like?" she said. She didn't know she was going to ask it until she did. Luciano was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned against the car and looked up at the same piece of sky. "Terrible at mornings," he said. "Could eat an extraordinary amount and never show it. He had this laugh. It was too loud for every room he was ever in. He never cared." A pause. He wanted out of the life. He'd been trying to find an exit for 2 years before he went to the FBI. "I didn't know. I thought he was restless. I thought he needed more responsibility." Another pause. "I gave him more responsibility." She didn't say anything. "He came to them because he thought it was the only door," Luciano said. "He couldn't come to me because I would have tried to find another way and kept him inside doing it. He knew that, so he found his own door. He was trying to take care of himself. Yes? You can't be angry at him for that." "I'm not." He looked back down from the sky. "I'm angry at everything else." They got back in the car. The last 3 hours of the drive went fast in the way that only happens when something is waiting at the end of it and your body knows it and doesn't waste energy on the interval. She stayed awake. Luciano drove the final stretch himself, the other man having traded off somewhere in Nebraska, and she watched his hands on the wheel. Steady, which she'd expected, but also something else. A quality of intentionality in the small corrections, the way he held the road without fighting it. The compound came up at 0519. She saw it first as light, a scatter of it against the dark mass of the mountain behind it, man-made and therefore wrong-colored against the pre-dawn. The road had turned to gravel 40 minutes ago, and the last 8 miles had been switchbacks and pine, and the kind of dark that cities didn't produce. The elevation had changed the temperature, and her palms ached in the cold. Luciano stopped the car a quarter-mile out and cut the lights. 2 vehicles behind them did the same. He turned to her. "You stay in the car." "No." "Rowan, I'm the only one who can identify which archive room and where the documentation is organized within it. I've seen Pierce's filing system. I know how he thinks about categorization." She met his eyes. "You need me in there, and we both know it. That's why you let me come." His jaw set. "You also need me available for Tanner's proceedings," she said, "which means you have a strategic incentive to keep me functional." "I have other reasons," he said. She stopped. He said it without particular emphasis, just a flat statement delivered in the same voice he used for operational facts. But it landed differently than operational facts, and they both knew that too. She held his gaze for a moment. "Then let's both come back," she said. They went in on foot, 6 men total, including Luciano, and Rowan in the dark sneakers that were still slightly too large, and her dress from last night that was never designed for mountain terrain in pre-dawn cold. She moved anyway. She focused on the ground in front of her and the back of Luciano's jacket and breathing through her nose, steady, the way she'd learned in the half-marathon. Don't think about the distance. Just manage the breath. The compound was larger than she'd imagined. A main structure, long and low, with what looked like 2 outbuildings connected by a covered walkway. Lights in the main building, several windows. A vehicle she didn't recognize parked at the far end. They came around the south side. The first contact happened at the corner. Pierce's security, 2 men, and the confrontation was brief and controlled, and she pressed herself against the exterior wall and kept her eyes forward and heard it resolve behind her without looking. She kept moving because Luciano had said, "Don't stop during the approach," and she had decided that was the one instruction she was going to treat as absolute. The side door was unlocked. She understood later that this was because Pierce hadn't fully believed he needed to be defensive yet. He'd landed 2 hours ago, and he thought he had time. He thought he was ahead of everything. Inside, a corridor, tile floor, overhead lights at half capacity. She oriented herself. Kitchen smell to the left, older air to the right, the particular stillness of a room full of paper and controlled temperature, which was what archive rooms smelled like in her experience, which was limited but specific. She went right. Luciano was 2 feet behind her. The archive room was at the end of the corridor behind a door that was heavier than the others and had a keypad. She looked at the keypad and thought about the penthouse door and about Declan's systematic approach to security that favored consistency over creativity, which was a vulnerability she'd identified without knowing she was identifying it. 6 digits. She tried the same sequence. The door opened, and then the lights came on. Not the archive lights, the main overheads, simultaneously. All of them. Declan Pierce was standing at the far end of the archive room. He had been there before they arrived. He had a phone in one hand, and behind him on the steel shelving unit, she could see the files, binders, physical documents, an external server array with blinking status lights, and beside him was a metal canister that she identified a half-second too slowly. Accelerant. He looked at her. He looked at Luciano. "I was wondering which of you would get here first," he said. His voice was the boardroom voice, the controlled one, the one she had thought she knew. "I've had a very informative 2 hours." "Step away from the shelving," Luciano said. "No!" Declan's thumb moved to the canister. "I don't think so." Rowan's eyes went to the server array. The status lights were green, not copying, not transmitting, still live. She did the math. The math was very fast and very simple, and it arrived at an answer she didn't want but couldn't argue with. "Declan," she said. He looked at her. She had spent 14 months learning his face, too. She knew the difference between his performances and whatever lived underneath them, and what was underneath right now was not what she'd expected. Not rage, not desperation, but something almost like exhaustion. A man who had been holding an enormous amount together for a very long time and could see the end of his ability to hold it. That made him more dangerous. Not less. "Whatever you're thinking about doing," she said, "you understand that Tanner's team arrives in 4 hours. Whatever happens in this room, they get here and they process this space, and if there's an accelerant involved, they're going to know, and it makes everything worse for you. Everything is already worse for me. It can be survivably worse," she said, "or it can be unsurvivably worse. Those are different." His thumb stayed on the canister. "There's a cooperation agreement on the table," she said. "Tanner told us. The drive has the documentation spine. They have what they need for Pierce's corporations. But cooperation on the network, the people you've been servicing, the structures above you, that's worth something. That's the difference between 20 years and less." "You're negotiating for him now," Declan said. "That's interesting." "I'm negotiating for the archive," she said, "because what's in it matters for reasons you don't fully know about yet." His eyes moved to Luciano. Something in them shifted, a piece of information reorganizing. "Marco DeLuca," he said. Luciano's stillness became a different kind of thing. "His file is in there," Declan said. "The full operational record, names, dates, authorization chain." He looked at Luciano steadily. "You want to know who gave the final authorization? It's not in the folder Tanner showed you. It's in there." He gestured at the shelving with the canister. "And if I open this, then it's gone," Luciano said. "Yes." The room held it. Rowan looked at Luciano. He was looking at Declan, and she couldn't see his face, but she could see his hands, and they were doing the things she'd learned to read. Not still, not loose, but held in a specific way that meant he was 3 steps ahead of the current moment, and the current moment was the thing standing between him and what came next. "The name," Luciano said. "Who authorized it?" "Step back from the door," Declan said. "Both of you. Give me a clear exit, and I'll tell you." "No." "Then we're done talking." Declan's thumb moved on the canister, and Luciano crossed the room in 4 steps, and Rowan did the only thing she could think of, which was to move toward the server array, toward the archive, putting herself between Declan and the shelving because she was smaller and faster than either of them, and the server was what mattered, and if the accelerant reached it, Declan's elbow caught her across the shoulder as Luciano hit him from the other side, and she went into the shelving unit hard enough that the metal edge caught her across the cheekbone, and the pain was white and specific. And she grabbed the closest binder with both bleeding hands and held it against her chest like a lifeline, because it was evidence. It was Marco's file, or close to it, and she was not letting it go regardless of what happened in the next 30 seconds. The canister hit the floor. She heard it, but she didn't see it because she was against the wall with the binder and her cheek was bleeding, and Luciano and Declan were on the floor between the shelving units, and she could hear the specific sounds of a fight that had gone to the ground, grunting and impact, and the sharp crack of something that might have been the canister, or might have been something worse. She looked. The canister was on its side, open. The accelerant was spreading across the tile toward the base of the nearest shelving unit. She looked at Luciano. He was on top of Declan, both hands occupied, and he looked up and saw what she was looking at, and their eyes met across the room, and she understood in that second that he couldn't get there in time, and she was the only one close enough, and the smell was already hitting her throat, and she had approximately, not a decision exactly. Decisions had intervals in them, the gap between perceiving and choosing. This had no gap. Her body simply went toward the problem because the problem was in front of her, and she was the only one close enough, and everything she'd carried through the last 6 hours, the bathroom floor, the elevator, the parking structure concrete under her palms, the switchbacks in the dark, all of it had been pointing toward this room and this floor and this specific 10 seconds, and she understood that with a clarity that had no drama in it, just the clean fact of the moment. She grabbed the nearest binder off the shelf, then another. She dropped them flat onto the tile in front of the spreading liquid, using the covers as a barrier, and then she pulled her jacket, the one Luciano's man had given her at the apartment, dark canvas, too large in the shoulders, and she pressed it down over the accelerant trail and held it with both bleeding palms, and leaned her full weight into it, and the smell hit the back of her throat like something chemical and sharp, and she held her breath and held the position. The spread stopped. Not completely, but enough. She looked up. Luciano had Declan face down on the tile with one knee in his back, and Declan's right arm at an angle that meant it was either dislocated or very close to it, and Declan was making a sound that was not quite a word, and not quite not one. A compressed, involuntary sound that meant he had run out of options, and his body knew it before his mind had finished accepting it. Luciano looked at her across the room. His face was cut in 2 places and his breathing was audible, and there was something in his eyes that she didn't have a word for yet. Relief wasn't right. It was too simple, too clean for what was on his face. "You're bleeding," he said. "I know," she said. "So are you." She kept both hands pressed on the jacket for another 15 seconds, counting, making sure the spread had genuinely stopped and wasn't working around the edge of the fabric. When she was satisfied, she sat back on her heels and looked at the shelving unit behind her. Intact, dry, the server array still blinking green, and exhaled for what felt like the first time in several minutes. The binder she'd been holding when Declan's elbow caught her was on the floor 2 feet away. She reached over and picked it up. The cover was dented from where it had hit the shelving, but the pages inside were fine. She opened it. Marco De Luca. Operational file. Authorization chain, dates, names. The 4th page had what they'd come for. She read it once. She closed the binder. She looked at Luciano. "I found it," she said. He was still holding Declan down. He looked at her with a question he didn't say. "The authorization," she said. "Final sign-off on the containment order. It's here." He held her eyes. "Who?" She looked at the page again. The name was not one she recognized, which meant it would mean something to him that it didn't mean to her. A name from his world, from the architecture of his life that she'd been on the edges of for one night, and would not, she understood, be on the edges of much longer. She said the name. Declan made a sound beneath Luciano's knee that was almost a word. Luciano's hand pressed down, flat, between Declan's shoulder blades, and the sound stopped. Luciano closed his eyes for 3 seconds. Just 3. Then he opened them, and he was looking at the middle distance, at something that wasn't in the room, and she watched him do the thing she'd watched him do in the car, and in the apartment, and on the parking level. Pull back from an edge, choose the form of the next thing deliberately rather than letting it choose itself. He looked at Declan. "Where's your phone?" he said. Jacket pocket, Declan said into the tile. His voice was flat with pain and something else, a resignation that had the quality of a man who'd known this room was coming for a while and was simply relieved to be done running toward it. Luciano reached into the jacket pocket and took the phone. He put it on the shelving unit next to Rowan without looking at her. Lock screen, he said. Biometric, Declan said. Face. Luciano crouched, took Declan's jaw in one hand without ceremony, and held the phone to his face. The screen unlocked. He stood and handed the phone to Rowan, and she understood what he wanted without being told, because she'd been understanding what he wanted without being told since approximately the second hour of this night. And she found the call log and looked at the last outbound call made 40 minutes ago. A number, no name attached. She photographed the screen with the backup phone she still had in her dress pocket. Because lawyers documented things, it was the instinct that never left. And then she wrote the number on the inside cover of the binder in pen she found on the shelving and handed both back to Luciano. He looked at the number. He looked at it for a long time. That's who he called when he landed, she said. Yes. The same person. Yes. He put the phone in his own pocket. It will be the last call they expect to matter. She didn't ask what came next for that person. She made a decision not to ask, a deliberate placement of a wall between what she understood and what she didn't need to understand, because she had her own architecture to think about, and she was only going to be able to build it on what she could actually stand behind. Outside, through the archive room's single high window, the sky had started to do something. Not light yet, not sunrise, but the particular deep blue that happened 40 minutes before it, the color that meant the dark had made its decision and was beginning to move on. She sat down on the floor of the archive room with the binder in her lap and her back against the shelving unit and her legs straight in front of her, and she let herself be done for a minute. Just 1 minute. Her cheek was swelling and her palms were a mess and her lungs still tasted like accelerant, and she was sitting on the floor of a mountain compound in Wyoming in someone else's shoes. And somewhere behind her, Declan Pierce was on the floor too. And somewhere in the pre-dawn outside, Tanner's vehicles were 3.5 hours away. She thought about Kara in the city, who had no idea where she was. She thought about the backup phone and the wrong number, and the 40 seconds between sending a text and receiving a reply from a stranger who asked operational questions at midnight and came anyway. She thought about what her mother had said about crying in public. She didn't cry, but she let herself feel the weight of the night in full for that 1 minute, the whole shape of it, without moving through it or managing it or converting it into something actionable, just feeling it, the fear, the anger, the particular vertigo of having your life reveal itself to be an entirely different shape than the one you'd been living inside. Then she stood up. Luciano had bound Declan's wrists with a zip tie from somewhere she hadn't tracked. He'd been carrying things she didn't know about all night, which was fine. She'd been carrying things he didn't know about too, and propped him sitting against the far wall. Declan's head was down. He was breathing. He looked like a man at the end of something, which was accurate. Luciano was standing near the server array looking at the status lights. "It's all still live," she said. "I know. We shouldn't move anything before Tanner's team arrives. Chain of evidence." "I know." He looked at her. "You're going to cooperate with them. Full statement." "Yes." "Are you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Within the parameters of whatever agreement Tanner is actually willing to put on paper." "That's a lawyer's answer." "You're a lawyer." "I was training to be." "You negotiated with a federal agent at midnight on 6 hours of no sleep after being held in a penthouse against your will," he said. "You're a lawyer." She almost smiled. It pulled at her swollen cheek, and she let it anyway. They sat with Declan in the archive room until the sky outside went from deep blue to pale gray to the first genuine suggestion of color. And then Luciano's remaining men came in from outside, and there was a period of practical reorganization that she was peripheral to. Inventory of the compound, securing of the archive materials. A conversation in Italian that she stayed out of. She used the time to document. She photographed every shelf in the archive room with the backup phone, systematic and thorough, moving shelf by shelf with the methodical patience of someone who understood that what she was looking at was a years-long investigation's worth of physical evidence, and the condition in which it was found would matter enormously in proceedings. She was on the third shelf when Luciano came to stand beside her. He watched her work for a moment. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "I want to." He was quiet. "It's Marco's case too," she said. "Whatever else is in here, whatever Tanner uses it for. His file is in here, and what happened to him is documented, and that should be done right." Luciano said nothing for a moment. "Yes," he said finally. "It should." She kept photographing. He stayed beside her, not helping, not interfering, just present, and she understood that this was also something. His being there, in this room, beside her, while she did this particular work. Tanner's vehicles arrived at 0643. She heard them from inside. The gravel, the doors, the particular atmosphere of a federal arrival, which had its own texture of organized momentum. She put the backup phone in her pocket and straightened and looked at Luciano. "However this goes," she said. "Yes," he said. She walked out of the archive room to meet them. Tanner came through the compound's main entrance, looking like a man who had been awake all night and was too experienced to show it as anything other than a slight compression around the eyes. He looked at Rowan first, then at Luciano, then at the archive room door behind them. "Pierce," he said. "Inside," Luciano said. "Secured. Unharmed." Tanner looked at the server array through the open door, at the binders, at the undisturbed shelving. Something in his professional expression shifted slightly, a recalibration of what he'd been expecting to find. "The accelerant," Rowan said. She walked him to the spot on the floor, pointed at the jacket still pressed to the tile. "He attempted to destroy the archive. It was contained before it spread. Your forensics team will want to document the distribution pattern." Tanner looked at the jacket, at the binders, at her. "You did that," he said. "Yes." He looked at her for a moment with something that wasn't quite what she'd call admiration, but was adjacent to it. A professional acknowledgement, one person who understood evidence to another. "Ms. Vale," he said, "I'm going to need a very long statement from you." "I know," she said. "I brought documentation." She handed him the binder. The processing of the compound took most of the day. She gave her statement in 2 sessions, 3 hours in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, sitting at a folding table that someone had brought in from a vehicle because the compound's furniture was not the kind that federal proceedings happened at. She was thorough. She was precise. She stated what she had observed, what she had read, what she had heard, and she stated the limits of her knowledge clearly and didn't speculate beyond them, because speculation was the thing that unraveled testimony, and she had not come this far to unravel anything. Luciano was in a separate room for most of it. She didn't know what was being negotiated, and she didn't ask. When she saw him in the late afternoon in the compound's main corridor, he had a bandage above his eye that someone had applied properly, and a cup of coffee that looked like it had been there a while. He handed it to her. She drank it. Cold, which she didn't care about. "How did it go?" she said. "Tanner is practical," he said, "which is the best thing you can say about a federal agent." "Agreement?" "The beginning of one." He looked at his hands. "It'll take months. There are things I won't give them and things I will, and the negotiation of the line between those things is going to require better legal representation than what I currently have." She looked at him. "I'm not in a position to practice law," she said. "I don't have a license. I have a degree I haven't finished and a bar exam I haven't taken." "I know," he said, "and I have a conflict of interest the size of Wyoming." "I know that too." "Then why are you looking at me like that?" "Because," he said, "you're the only person I've met in 10 years who told me what I actually needed to hear instead of what was convenient to tell me. And I don't know what to do with that yet, but I know I don't want to not have access to it." She looked at him for a moment. The corridor was quiet. Outside, the mountain was doing the thing mountains did in late afternoon, the light going gold and long and making everything look like the end of something. "That's not a job offer," she said. "No," he said, "it's not." She looked out the window at the light. "I have to rebuild," she said. "Everything. I have my degree and a suitcase of clothes at the Pierce apartment that I am never going back for, and a sister in Portland who doesn't know if I'm alive." She paused. "I have to start from scratch." "Yes," he said, "that's going to take a while." "Yes," So whatever this is, she gestured between them, not defining it, because defining it was a thing for people who had slept and weren't covered in dried blood and accelerant fumes. It has to wait. I can wait, he said. And she believed him because he said it in the same voice he used for facts. She finished the coffee. She handed the cup back. The name in the binder, she said. The authorization. What are you going to do? He was quiet for a moment. What needs to be done? That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. He looked at her steadily. What I can tell you is that it won't happen in a way that costs you anything. Nothing I do from here touches you. She held his eyes. I'm not asking you to protect me. I know, he said. I'm telling you anyway. Declan Pierce was transported in a federal vehicle at 1700 hours. She watched from the compound's main window without going outside. He walked with the flat efficiency of a man whose body was still moving on old programming, upright and controlled, and he didn't look at the building as he got in. She had thought distantly that she'd want to see his face at this moment. She found that she didn't, particularly. What she wanted was for the vehicle to move, and it did. And then there was just the gravel and the mountain and the late light, and that was enough. She found out later, weeks later, in the formal notification that Tanner's office sent to the address she'd given them, a sublet in Lincoln Park that her sister had helped her find from Portland over the phone. The shape of what had been on the drive and in the archive combined. The RICO case was filed within 60 days. 4 corporate structures dissolved, 11 individuals named as defendants across 2 states. Asset freezes that made the financial news under headlines, she read, with the particular detachment of someone who knew the human architecture behind the numbers in a way the reporter didn't. Marco DeLuca was named in the case documentation as a cooperating witness whose identity had been criminally compromised. It was 4 lines in a federal filing. She read those 4 lines 3 times. She thought about what Luciano had said. He had this laugh. It was too loud for every room he was ever in, and she thought that 4 lines in a federal filing was not enough, and also that it was what his choice had made possible, and he had made it knowing what he was doing at 26, with full understanding, and that meant something. She wanted it to mean something. She decided it did. She took the bar exam in February. She passed on the first sitting, which she mentioned to no one because she had learned, somewhere in the months since Wyoming, that the things you were most certain of were the ones that required the least announcement. She called her sister more. She went to Portland for a weekend in March, and sat on Kara's couch and watched a movie she didn't follow and ate takeout, and it was the most normal she'd felt since before any of it, the specific, ordinary comfort of a person who knew you before you became whoever you were now. She heard from Luciano 4 times in those months. Once, a text. Just, agreement finalized, more than I expected from them. Once, a call that lasted 11 minutes, most of which was about the case, and at the end of which he asked how the bar exam had gone, and she told him she'd passed, and there was a silence that had a quality to it. She'd learned to read, across all the different forms of his silence. Once, a letter. Handwritten, which surprised her. On plain paper with no letterhead. It was about Marco, mostly. Things he'd remembered. The laugh that was too loud. A summer when Marco was 16 and had briefly decided to become a chef, which had lasted 3 weeks and produced an impressive quantity of inedible food and a permanent smell in the kitchen that took months to clear. She read it twice, and then she put it in the desk drawer and she left it there. The 4th time was October, 8 months after Wyoming. She was walking along the lakefront in the early evening, the kind of evening that Chicago did in autumn when it wasn't being brutal about the weather. The lake flat and gray and the light going out of it slowly, the city behind her doing its thing with the office towers and the reflection. She had done this walk most evenings since she moved to the new apartment. It was the thing that had replaced the things she used to do when her life was a different shape. He was sitting on a bench, not waiting in any performed way, just sitting like someone who had arrived and was comfortable with waiting, which was the most consistent thing about him across all the contexts she'd seen him in. She sat down beside him. They were quiet for a while. The lake moved. Somewhere a dog was doing something urgent about a bird. The city behind them was making its evening sounds. "How long have you been in Chicago?" she said. 2 days, he said. "Did you call ahead?" "No." That's presumptuous. Yes, he said. She looked at the water. The name from the binder, she said. Is it handled? Yes. She didn't ask how. She had put the wall there months ago and she was keeping it. And Enzo, she said, also handled. A pause. He's alive. He's not in the same position he was, but he's alive. She thought about Enzo on the parking structure floor and the look on his face and the 4 years he'd carried, and she felt something that wasn't sympathy, but was in the same neighborhood, the recognition that people made catastrophic choices for survivable reasons and then lived inside the consequences until they didn't. I'm starting to build a practice, she said. Environmental law. There's a firm in the Loop that does regulatory work, and they've offered me an associate position. It's a small firm. It's not where I thought I'd be. Is it where you want to be? She thought about it. It's where I can do actual work, she said, which turns out to matter more than where I thought I'd be. He nodded. He was looking at the water. I'm not the same, he said. It wasn't an apology, just an observation, delivered in the flat, factual voice. The last 8 months, things have changed in the structure of what I do, what I'm responsible for. He paused. The agreement with Tanner's office changed the shape of things considerably. Are you out, she said, of the life? Not entirely. Maybe not ever entirely. He looked at her. But the center of gravity is different. She looked back at the water. I'm not asking you to be anything different, she said. I want you to know that. Whatever. I'm not waiting for a version of you that doesn't exist. I know, he said. I'm just saying. I know, he said again, and it was the same voice as I can wait, and she believed it the same way. The light went out of the water slowly, the way it did here, not all at once, but incrementally. The gray deepening by degrees until the line between the lake and the sky became approximate. The city lights came up behind them. Across the water, nothing was visible, just the flat dark of the lake, going somewhere she couldn't see. She thought about the backup phone in Declan's bathroom, the one bar of signal, the way her hands had been shaking so badly that she'd typed the wrong area code, which was the mistake that had sent a desperate text to a stranger at 11 at night and received in 40 seconds a reply that had no warmth in it and no comfort and no reassurance. Just, are you injured and how many men and I'm coming, which turned out to be exactly what she'd needed. She thought about what her life had looked like from the outside at this time last year. The penthouse. The ring she'd sent back through Tanner's office in an evidence envelope because she wasn't mailing it to an address she'd never go to again. The version of herself that had stopped asking questions because the answers had seemed less important than the stability. That woman was not someone she missed. That was the thing she'd understood in the months since, slowly and without fanfare. She didn't grieve the life she'd been living because it had not, on examination, been hers. This was hers. The cold bench, the flat gray lake, the associate position at a small firm in the Loop doing work that mattered to her before she ever knew what a penthouse looked like, the sister who called on Sundays, the bar exam results in a drawer she hadn't framed because she'd passed it for herself, and that was sufficient, and the man sitting beside her on the bench with a bandage that had long since come off the eye but left a small scar she'd seen twice since Wyoming and never mentioned, who had come through an elevator door in a dark coat with water on his shoulders because she'd typed the wrong number and he'd asked the right questions and come anyway. She reached over and picked up the backup phone from her jacket pocket. She'd kept it. She still didn't know why, entirely, except that it felt important to keep it, the way certain objects acquire weight from what happened near them. She held it out to him on her palm, the same small phone, the same cracked corner from where she'd gripped it too hard in the bathroom. He looked at it. He looked at her. She smiled. It pulled at the cheek that had healed crooked, just slightly, a thing you'd only notice if you knew where to look. She didn't care. First message I ever sent you, she said. He picked up the phone and looked at the screen. The message was still there, the way things stayed in old phones that had never been cleared, preserved in the cheap hardware of a backup device that had no reason to erase anything. Please help me. I'm being held against my will. I don't have much time, please. He held it for a moment. Then he set it down on the bench between them, and he looked at the lake, and the city lights shimmered out across the water. And neither of them said anything for a while because the things that needed saying had been said in parking structures and archive rooms and federal offices and handwritten letters. And what was left didn't need words. It just needed the bench and the lake and the incremental dark coming in off the water, and two people sitting in it without flinching. That was enough. That was more than enough. It was everything.